Good morning, everyone. We are fortunate to have a distinguished panel today on demographics, especially the 2020 census. Our panel is made up of Bob Coates, who's the governor's census liaison, Michael Klein, who is the state demographer, and David Klein, who's a what's that?
No relation.
No relation. And no relation, coming from Atlanta. David Klein from the Atlanta office, he's a geographer there, the Census Bureau. So I'll let Bob get started. When we get to Q&A, we do need, we're recording audio here, so I may come around with a mic to, if you could just be patient for a second to get your question going through the microphone. Okay?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Again, my name is Bob Coates. I'm from the North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management, and I'm the governor's census liaison. So we've got three folks here, and we're going to start from worst to best. So I'm going to try to be brief and get out of the way. But I want to give you all a little bit of background about what's going on with the census, what we've done so far in terms of geospatial preparation, and then I'm going to turn it over to the other folks and give you an idea about what's coming next and how this all ties into long-range data and planning in North Carolina. All right, so very quickly, as we get started, we need to know why we even care about the census at all. So the census drives a couple of very important parts of our day-to-day existence in North Carolina. Number one, the census is required by the Constitution to count every resident once and in the right place. And that data, that collection of who we are as a community and where we live, are the components for, first of all, assessing how many seats get apportioned to which state, and then where those districts get drawn. The other key component to the census is the largest peacetime mobilization that the United States does. It is used for driving an awful lot of funding. So there was a study that came out in about a year and a half ago from George Washington University. They looked at the economic impact of the census on a state-by-state basis. In North Carolina, the federal government apportioned about $1,623 per person per year in fiscal 2015 alone, based on census numbers. Since the census is only done once every 10 years, that's $1,623 per person per year for 10 years. And I don't know of a local government anywhere in our state that can afford to pass up that kind of funding. On top of that, the state uses census dollars to apportion just over $200 per person per year in state funds. So we're looking at about $1,800 to $1,900 per person per year based on the census count. So we want to make sure that we're getting that count right for every community in the state. And for planning purposes, again, very granular data down to very small geographic areas. So this is how we get the best data possible. It's foundational for a lot of models and future planning for everything from schools to highway planning to infrastructure for roads, bridges, electricity, water, sewer. All of that comes down to having a good idea of what our demographics look like. And also for businesses. They want to know if they're looking at expanding their markets, if they're looking for labor force, they need characteristics of that population. And a lot of times they're looking at census numbers. So the census is important for apportionment, our voice in Congress and locally, our funding, and our long-term planning. So, since the decennial census is the foundation for so much work that gets done here, there's two main facets of the census that set that foundation. The first is the geographic foundation. We've been working on that for a couple of years now. Several programs, and I'm just going to gloss over these real quickly because these are either complete or are soon to be complete. The Census Redistricting program, the local update of census addresses. How many folks in here are familiar with LUCA? Yeah, good. The Participant Statistical Areas Survey or program, PSAP, that's going on right now. Folks heard of that? Less, but still good, okay. The Boundary Annexation Survey. Okay, good. So these set the geographic foundation on which the census operates. We're going to take a little bit of time to talk about each one of these. But then, as we just mentioned, once we get the geographic foundation set, the demographic, the actual count of the folks on those geographic areas and how those numbers get tied back to the appropriate geographic areas. That's really what does the heavy lifting for planning, funding, apportionment, and everything that we do within the state long term. So before we start talking about what local governments have been doing to get ready for the census, it's worthwhile to take a step back and talk about what the state has done. So while the main part of preparing geospatially for the census involving local government started about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, the states were involved even before that time. There's something called the Geographic Support System Initiative, or GSSI. That was an effort by the Census Bureau to update, and the Census Bureau is an alphabet soup. So LUCA, BAS, PSAP, GSSI. There's something called the MAF, the master address file that the Census Bureau has. So they're constantly seeking to update that master address file because that's how they're connecting questionnaires with places where people may be living. So they do get periodic updates from the Postal Service every 6 months, but they also recognize that the real experts on addressing are local governments. Toward that end, they reached out to states saying, do you have any addressing information that you can provide between the two big censuses, between the LUCA programs, to augment the updates that we're getting from the Postal Service? So that's what the GSSI was. Now, in a lot of places, you'll see municipalities participated. These are the red dots. Counties participated in some cases. These are the blue areas. And some really active states that had some forethought on this said, we want to make sure that we're providing all the information that we can. So North Carolina was one of the states that participated in GSSI. So we were providing address information that we had from E911 services, from Address NC, those types of information. The goal behind GSSI was that it would make the pain of LUCA a little less painful if we had some updates before we got to it. So with census redistricting, I just want to say a few quick bullet points on this. This is not apportionment redistricting. This is not the political aspect of redistricting. This is the actual verification of the boundaries of census blocks and voting districts. So census blocks are the smallest geographic components for which data is going to be released. These are the small building blocks that are actually used to draw congressional districts if and when North Carolina does get another congressional seat. As of 2015, we were pretty comfortable in getting one, but if we do a great job in promoting and participating in the census and other states don't, we could get two. So the component pieces for drawing where these congressional districts are the census blocks, and those are defined through the Census Redistricting program. So it's a multi-stage program. We have just wrapped up. The block boundary suggestion process is complete. We're in the voting district review process now. That information has been provided to the Census Bureau. They're reviewing it, and they'll provide feedback to the state sometime this summer. One of the key components of redistricting and of this census is the Census Bureau has released a new piece of software to help local governments to participate in all geospatial programs. Now, there are different iterations of this program. So if you got GUPS, again, another alphabet soup, the Geographic Update Partnership Software. So GUPS is free. It's based on a QGIS format, and it's there to assist you with verifying boundaries for all the census programs. Now, as I mentioned, there are different iterations of this program. So if you downloaded GUPS for BAS maybe 2 years ago, you would need to download a different version for LUCA. You will need to download a different version for PSAP, but it's the same basic functionality. For many programs, you had the option for LUCA. You could use your own ArcGIS or other software. As we're going into PSAP, this is your only way to participate in PSAP, will be GUPS. GUPS makes sure there's business intelligence factored into it, so it makes sure you're not breaking rules. It also sums up all the pieces of your feedback into the appropriate naming function and exports it as the right format for the Census Bureau. So it does make your life easier if you use GUPS, but as I mentioned, for things like BAS and LUCA, you didn't have to use it. For PSAP, you will. So just give you a quick screen capture of what that looks like. Okay, so what have the local governments actually been asked to do? They've been working on the Boundary and Annexation Survey, LUCA, the Participant Statistical Areas Program, and new construction. We're also in the stage of the game right now where we're shifting gears. So I've already had one question this morning about complete count committees and how do we promote census participation. That's where we are right now. A lot of the work that you folks have done has been really grueling to verify all these address points, to look at boundaries and things like that. If the people in your communities don't actually respond to the questionnaires, all that preparatory work is kind of wasted. So you have a dog in this fight on both ends. So for promotion, you guys have the most knowledge about what the local barriers to participation are going to be. There's some census tools that give you a broad picture about where areas of risk are going to be at the sub-county level, but you guys are going to know what additional factors are there. Plus, you folks are also much better known to your local communities than someone at the state is or someone at the Census Bureau. So having trusted local voices saying this is important to our community, that's $1,623. That's tax dollars you've already paid. Being counted on the census brings those tax dollars back to your community. If you're not counted, those dollars are going to go someplace else. So that's the message for your trusted local voices. And those trusted local faces create things called complete count committees. And there are partnership specialists from the Census Bureau right now that are really pushing that engagement role. So hopefully you've heard something about this already. The partnership specialists are active. I know there are about 60 counties that have already signed off saying that they will promote the census. If you're not sure if your county has signed off or not, might be a good question when you get back to your offices. Hey, what are we doing for census promotion? Okay, so the plans, the programs that we've gone through so far, LUCA, the Local Update of Census Addresses program, is a once-a-decade opportunity for local governments to sign on, to take a look at the census address list, the master address file for your area, to verify any residential and group quarters addresses for your community. Residential addresses, now we're talking up here addresses. We're not asking if they're inhabited or not. They can be vacant. They're just any place where someone could be living as of Census Day. And Census Day is going to be April 1st, 2020. It's always April Fool's Day of years ending in 0. Easy to remember. Group quarters are places where folks are living for an extended amount of time, but they may have a usual residence elsewhere, like a prison. Or a military barracks, or a college dorm, or a nursing home. These are group quarters. So LUCA was asking folks to verify both those types of addresses. Not business addresses, not corporate addresses, just group quarters and residential addresses. So the materials were mailed out in January 17. The verification process has ended. We're at the stage of the game right now, and for LUCA and also for PSAP, this was a limited time program. You had 120 calendar days to verify your addresses. And for LUCA, since you were looking at actual address information, you had to look at the information to participate. You had to be sworn to Title 13 confidentiality. That's the same super strict confidentiality that the census staff has to operate by. Not every one of these geographic preparation programs was confidentiality limited, but LUCA is a big one. So right now, the program has wrapped up. The local governments that participated have provided their information. The Census Bureau is reviewing that information, and they're going to provide feedback later this summer. You'll have 30 days if you see any issues with that feedback that you want to appeal. And again, April Fool's Day, 2020, will be here before you know it. Okay, so to prepare for that, the Census Roadshow here, David Klein, Mike Klein, no relation, and Bob Coates, the roadie, did a road tour around the state to kind of talk about why LUCA was important, to answer some questions, to get into the details a little bit. We did about 15 or 16 workshops across the state. This is just the workshops that we did for this 10-day period in April. So that was our outreach. Hopefully everybody had a chance to attend some of these workshops. Our participation for 2020 LUCA, we had 89% participation for the 2020 LUCA. That's up from 78% in for the 2010 census. So we think a lot of folks saw the value of LUCA. Hopefully a lot of folks were able to attend the workshops, but we saw much better buy-in. Now, for areas that didn't participate, the state did the best job we could at trying to verify those addresses. But the point behind LUCA is nobody knows more about your addresses than the folks that actually issue the addresses, the local governments. So this is what our participation looked like this year. So the next one's a boundary annexation survey. BASS is the annual verification of corporate boundary changes, both state, county, and municipal changes. It tracks what it's looking for is all boundary changes that went into it that were legally in effect as of January 1st of the reference year. So the materials go out at the end of the year, late December, early January. Any updates that are submitted by March are reflected in the American Community Survey, which publishes data each year, and also in census estimates that come out. At the end of March, April, for those folks that haven't responded to BAS, you get a call from John Bridgers at the Secretary of State's office, or if you're really unlucky, you get a call from me saying, hey, we haven't heard from you on BAS. This is important. BAS is separate from what Mike does with the state certified estimates of population, and I'm going to defer to him to explain the difference in those. So you will get a survey from the Census Bureau, BAS, saying, have you had any boundary changes? You're also going to get a survey from Mike, and I'll let Mike clear up what the differences are there. But they are different. Best practices for BAS, always verify your boundaries. We get a lot of calls when we call folks on non-response. Local governments say, we haven't had an annexation in 30 years. North Carolina happens to be one of those old states, one of the original ones. So just because you haven't had a boundary change doesn't mean the boundaries the Census Bureau has are right for you. Once upon a time, your boundary was go down to Farmer Jones' fence post and hang a left and then go this way. Once upon a time, BAS was conducted on paper. So you got colored pencils to draw those. So people did the best job they could, but it doesn't mean that they're 100% accurate. And as we get closer to the census, that accuracy is going to be very, very important. So even if you haven't had boundary changes, take the time to make sure that the boundaries that you see in BAS are accurate. So in terms of boundary preparation, there's a number of things that go on. There's a BAS process. There's also a process required by North Carolina general statutes. If you do have a boundary change, you're obligated to notify the Secretary of State's Office, Land Records Management, of that boundary change. If you don't, the boundary can still be in effect. So we have the opportunity between the different irons that are in the fire right now to have different versions of boundaries, and they don't always agree. So right now within the state, we're looking at creating a centralized authoritative boundary resource for all of North Carolina. That'll do a couple of things. It'll make sure we're all on the same page, for one thing. It'll also decrease the amount of times you have to answer the same question for different agencies. So it'll reduce the burden on local government. We'll have an authoritative resource, and it'll be more accurate than what we have now. So I'll defer also if Mike wants to talk a little bit about that. So that's kind of the work that we've done geospatially so far. As I mentioned, we are shifting gears into that promotion phase. The state of North Carolina has a complete count committee. This is the landing page for that and the slick North Carolina logo, because David's in the room. You can plug your ears now. The census is very, very important to North Carolina. I only care about it for North Carolina. I don't really care if other states don't participate. So we have a slick logo up there for North Carolina census because we're the only state that matters. So I want to feel free to grab that logo, use it for your own promotion. Feel free to make your own logo to promote the census locally. But the importance is this is something that's really, really important to us. It's a big federal program, but it's important to North Carolina. This website is going to have a resource library coming soon that will have things like fact sheets, bullet points, drop-in article, blog posts, things like that. We'll also plan on having a map of existing complete count committees so folks can plug in with their local census promotion. There's also going to be a form there if you have questions about the census, contact information. So I would encourage you to go to census.nc.gov to see what's going on with census promotion in the state. If worse comes to worse, you can always give me a call or email me. That's my contact information right there. I don't know if the plan is just for us to take questions at the end, but I will hand it off to Mike Klein and let him go from here. So I don't know.
It should be open. Make sure that, so y'all can hear me. Okay. I'm going to walk around a little bit more than Bob did, but so I'm going to take a little bit different perspective. Bob and David both are going to focus on the Census 2020. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about the population estimates program. I think some people think that Bob and I and David just twiddle our thumbs between decades because we're not doing anything when the census is not happening. But that's not true. There's a lot of preparations that I know that many of y'all are involved in, that we're involved in, and then also we're involved in promoting Census Bureau estimates and then also doing our own types of analyses, and including our population estimates that I produce every year. So just give you a little bit of background, the state demographer. So there's a couple of major things that I'm involved in. One is doing demographic analyses for the governor's office, for the budget office, for any state agencies that are asking to get a little bit more perspective of how population may impact their particular agency. One of the key things I work on a yearly basis, and this involves collecting information from many of you and collecting information from other sources and producing population estimates for municipalities and counties on a yearly basis. And then also producing population projections that look at 20 years from now. I'm also part of the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates, so there's state demographers throughout the country, and they're doing similar things than what I am doing, and what we do is help the Census Bureau with their own population estimates. So we're collecting data for them, and also we're reviewing. When they're put out their population estimates, I actually see those before they're produced. So if there's any questions that you may have about the Census Bureau's estimates, it's good to talk to me, and then I can make sure that maybe next round they get their estimates correct. The other thing I do is help Bob and others promote the Census 2020, and also do some other things, like one of the things that we're involved in, or I'm involved in right now, is group quarters and transitory location address information. So it's a little bit beyond LUCA. So homeless gathering places, soup kitchens, RV parks, motels, hotels where people may be living on a temporary basis. Those are the type of information that I'm working on right now, and I may be reaching out to you to help me identify those locations. So the estimates are used for planning and to distribute funds. The Census Bureau does population estimates on an annual basis for state, for the county, for places, and for sub-county areas. What they do is produce an estimate every year, and they revise their previous estimates going back to, right now, going back to 2010. Those estimates are used to weight other Census Bureau surveys like the American Community Survey, and they're also used by agencies for planning and statistical reporting and to distribute federal funds. Similarly, at the state level, I produce population estimates for the state, for counties, municipalities, and sub-county areas, which is mainly, well, which really means if you're a municipality that crosses more than one county, I'm estimating every piece of that municipality for each county area. I produce the certified estimates, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those mean, standard estimates, and I also revise estimates going back to 2010 based on new information that I've received and different modeling, or new modeling as well. Those are used for state agencies and also to distribute funds primarily from the Department of Revenue and the Powell Bill funds from the Department of Transportation. Now, both of these estimates programs require a good census count. So that's why it's important. If we get a bad count in 2020, then that's going to perpetuate throughout the whole decade, because I have to start out with a base to begin with. Bob already talked a little bit about the impacts fiscally for municipalities and counties. $1.5 billion in state funds are distributed on these two primary programs, Department of Revenue and Department of Transportation. Again, requires a good count for 2020. So I want to give you a little bit of perspective of what's going on in the state. We're the 9th largest state in the country. We surpassed Michigan this decade, and in the past 8 years, we've added more people than Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio. If we look back to the population grows by both by net migration and also natural increase, more births than deaths. If we look back to the 1950s, 1960s, All of our growth was due to net migration, natural increase, because more people were leaving the state than coming in. And that has changed so that by 2010, the majority of our growth is due to net migration, more people moving in than leaving, and we still have positive natural increase. About 72% of our growth in terms of net migration, that portion of it, is from domestic, more people moving from other states than leaving, and then about 28% are international migration. Now, if we look at just the domestic migration, the net domestic migration, there's only 22 states in the District of Columbia that had more people moving into the state than leaving. And North Carolina is third among those 22 states, after Florida and Texas. Now, if we look back to 1970, about 40 years ago, our population was almost half of what it was in 2010, at 5.1 million. By 2010, we had 9.5 million in North Carolina. If we look towards the future, by 2038, we'll almost double, increase to 12.8 million by 2038. Of course, our growth isn't distributed throughout the state. The growth is primarily in the metropolitan areas. This is the same as we see throughout the country, and particularly in the Piedmont area. In the current estimate period, 33 counties lost population. There's a lot more than the 7 that lost population in the previous decade. Now, if we look to the future, from 2019 to 2029, we expect, if the trends continue, 17 counties to lose population. These are primarily rural in nature, and particularly in the eastern part of the state. These are the 20 fastest growing municipalities between 2010 and 2017. Many of those are in the larger metropolitan areas. Anybody see their towns on here? Who is that? What? Okay. Harrisburg. Where else? Where? Okay. So very fast growing areas that are impacted by this high growth and having to deal with transportation problems and housing, all these different issues with this high growth in those municipalities. Not surprisingly, municipalities with the largest numeric gain: Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Cary, Greensboro, some of the largest communities in the state. Now, if we look at the state as a whole, what makes it challenging to estimate or count the population of North Carolina is that we're a large state. Like I said, we're the 9th largest state in the country. About 5.8, almost 60% of our population is in municipalities, but a good portion, 44%, are in unincorporated areas. Now, this map, and I came from Texas, and people talk about Texas or think Texas is rural, but it's really more urban than it is rural. But if you go back to Texas, and West Texas in particular, where I grew up, you think of rural, well, that means that you have one neighbor maybe 10 miles away. In North Carolina, you have a lot of people in rural areas, but this particular map, all it is, that those black dots represent 6 people in a census block. And if you just map out that, you can actually see the outline of North Carolina. So there's a lot of folks in the rural areas. We also have, of course, the largest county, Mecklenburg County. Smallest county, Turrell County, 4,300. Largest incorporated city is Charlotte. The smallest village now, there's a couple of villages that actually disincorporated this decade so far. Smallest incorporated village is 23. Anybody want to take a guess what that is?
Spencer Mountain.
Where?
Spencer Mountain.
Nope. Spencer Mountain actually disincorporated.
Right.
No. Grandfather Village. So I want to take a little bit, to kind of get into my processes. How many people are from municipalities or counties in here? How many have been involved with the population estimates with my surveys at all? Okay, a few. So I want to give you, on the left side is the Census Bureau's processes. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that, but just kind of give you an idea of their schedule. The county estimates usually come out in March, but because of the government shutdown, they'll be out in April. All the other schedule remains the same. In terms of any sort of feedback from local communities, that occurs in December through the housing unit estimates. And really what happens is they send me the housing unit estimates to take a look at. I compare those to my building permit survey. But if you happen to see something in your Census Bureau population estimates that may not seem right, you can certainly contact me and I'll double check and make sure that they've got your building permits correct. On my side, my process actually goes throughout the year. I'm collecting different types of data. But the first thing that I do in terms of contacting you is in May, I'll send out a letter that will say, here's the points of contacts we have for our annual survey. Is this correct? Do we need to update that? In June, I'll produce my preliminary county population estimates. July will be when I send out the actual survey. So you'll have 3 weeks to respond to that survey. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. End of August, I produce my preliminary population estimates and send those out for review. And it's a quick turnaround, but I need responses by September 10th so I can produce the certified estimates by September 16th. And then following that, end of October, will be the population projections. So Bob talked a little bit about the different boundaries. And for the Census Bureau, they're looking at January 1st as the boundary. My survey, I'm actually looking at July 1st as a boundary. And the difference between the standard estimates and the certified estimates is the certified estimates includes any area that has been annexed within the last year. So this year, and actually this should be 2019. So this year we'll be asking questions about any annexations through 2019. Give you just a brief overview of the different methods for our estimates. The Census Bureau on the county estimates provides, or they use an administrative method, so they're just looking at births and deaths, vital statistics data, and then they're looking at IRS and some other indicators to look at migration. For our estimates, we use their estimates, but we adjust it because there's some things that they're a little bit dated on. So we have more recent information on group quarters populations. We make that adjustment. We average it with another model at the county level, looking at household population and looking at vehicle registrations, school enrollment, and 3 years of births. And those indicators, averaging those together will give our population estimates at the county level. At the municipal level, the Census Bureau just looks at building permits. That's all they do, is they say, here's the county estimate, here's what the building permits look like, and so we're going to distribute it within the county based on those building permits. For us, for the state, we actually look at 3 different methods. We look at historical change, and divide it up depending on which area of the municipality growth is occurring. So we assume that the central part of the municipality is going to have a different growth rate than those that are more recently annexed. We do also look at building permits, and then we also assume that the municipality grows at the same rate as the county as a whole. Those 3 things are averaged together, and for each municipality, they actually have different weights, and those weights are based on an analysis of the 2010 census. Group quarters population, like I said, the Census Bureau is usually a year behind on what they're including in terms of group quarters. We actually have the most recent data on group quarters. So the survey goes out the last week in June, and then you'll have the third week in July to respond. We're asking questions on annexations, and that's very important for the certified estimates. So any annexations that have occurred within the current year, building permit survey, and then also group quarters survey. And we're really just asking to verify that what the information we have, there's no new group quarters facility that's been added. This is what our survey looks like. It's an online survey that you'll be able to log in and then respond to each one of those components. On the back end, we're actually changing something. On the population estimates, in the past, we've sent out a letter to each municipality and county and said, here's your preliminary population estimates. Please call us if you have any comments or questions. This year, we're actually working on a process so that we'll actually send this to you electronically, and you'll be able to review and comment electronically. And we're also asking for the point of contact to either be the person that's filling out the survey, or it could be someone else, to be a mayor or town clerk or someone else that may want to review those surveys. In order to review, we're just asking you to make sure that we've included all your annexations. Also, if there's been housing units been added to previous annexations, you can update that as well. And if you have recent annexations in the past year, you should have two estimates. You should have a certified estimate and a standard estimate. Also, looking at deviations from past trends, differences between current or other indicators and what we're showing as a population change. That doesn't mean that you have some indicator of maybe building permit increase and we're showing population decline. Well, it could be that there's a large group quarters facility that's closed down or something. And so there could be other reasons why our population estimates look different than what your indicators say. But still, it's something to look at and to comment about, and we can take a look and review it before we certify the population estimates. Municipalities can challenge Census Bureau estimates, and there's a process for that. You can always contact me if you have any questions about their estimates. You can also challenge the state estimates, but it's very limited on what you can challenge. It really has to do with if you reported an annexation and we did not include it, then there's a process for challenging that. I won't get into the population projections, but we do provide population projections going out 20 years, and those are include Hispanic origin for the total population, and then also race by sex, by age groups and total population by sex and age. Those are different data sets that we provide going out 20 years from now. And there is a website if you want to download or from any of those data sets or look at some of the different tables that we have provided. Thank you. Oh, we got it. Okay.
All yours.
Thank you. Greetings, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying the conference so far. As mentioned earlier, my name is David Klein, and I'm one of the geographers out of the Atlanta Regional Census Center. Although I'm part of the Atlanta region, I'm actually a work-at-home geographer, and I live and work in Harrisburg. And I think somebody mentioned they were from Harrisburg. Very nice. So yeah, my commute basically exists of me getting up in the morning and walking downstairs and going to work. This is the most I've driven in over a year. So, oh, and if there's anything that you should take away from this conference, David Klein said he wants everybody in the entire country to fill out their questionnaire, and no state is more important than the other. So there you go. More waters, please. Thank you. All right. Things we'll talk about today. I think Bob and Mike have already talked about everything. I really don't even have anything to discuss. So, but yeah, we'll go over LUCA. We'll look at some more dates. Bass, new construction. That's our big program coming up. Coming up this year, I'll give you some dates about that, and we'll talk about PSAP a little bit here. Geographic partnership programs. Why is it so important to participate in these? When headquarters gives us a project, they tell us, the regional geographer level, it's important for y'all to do this because you've got local knowledge. I do not have local knowledge. Like I said, I live in Harrisburg. I know what is going on in my neighborhood, and that is about it. But it's you folks that live in the cities and the counties, you really know what's going on out there. So you know where development is happening, you know where growth is occurring, you know what's going on in your communities. So that's why it's so important for you guys to participate, in these programs, especially LUCA, especially Bass, especially new construction. So let's see. So some of the partnership programs, again, so again, LUCA here, new construction. We'll go over these individually. The first one we'll talk about is LUCA. Whoops. That's the wrong LUCA, but he's got a friend that's going to make you an offer you can't refuse. So here we go. We'll talk about our LUCA schedule here. You know, on the drive up, I was thinking, my gosh, we didn't even start at LUCA. We were just getting ready to do, 2 years ago when we had this conference, we were getting ready to go out and start doing these LUCA promotional workshops. So as you can see here, that's what we did in March 2017. All the checks that we've done so far, that's everything we've accomplished for LUCA. We're getting ready to do the LUCA feedback. They sent us letters just last week for us to review that we're going to send to you guys that explains how to do, explains the LUCA feedback and how to go through the appeals process. And also I'd just like to mention here, Bob and Mike have both talked about, how much, the type of economic funding that's impacted by census numbers, and they gave a number for each individual, roughly about $1,800 per person. Here at the Census Bureau, we don't count individuals as so much as we count households, because we send a single questionnaire to a household and one person there fills it out. And I usually think about it in terms of that funding in terms of how it impacts a household. So it's roughly $1,800 per person. If you think about a household with 4 people, my household has 4 people in it. Say that household was missed for the census. So that's $1,800 times 4. That's $7,200 per year times 10, $72,000 for one household. Now think about it if it's 10 households or even 100 households, and the money adds up very quickly. And again, point out, Census Day, April 1st, 2020. Bass. Again, I'm sure many of you would rather be fishing. Unfortunately for our friend LUCA, he sleeps with the fishes. So bass. See, North Carolina doesn't have the agreement where everybody sends the...
Not yet.
Okay, so I don't want y'all to get confused about some of the dates that Mike showed you. We do have a deadline coming up tomorrow for bass. If you've returned it by March 1st, your bass information will be included in the estimations program and the ACS information. If you get it in by May 31st, it'll be included in subsequent bass materials. And I always say when I go out and do these presentations, I think about, the most important program you can participate in is probably the bass. program, you've got to make sure your boundaries are correct. Whatever boundaries you have on April 1st, 2020, that's how we're going to tabulate your population. If your boundaries are incorrect, your population is going to be incorrect. And not only going to be incorrect on April 1st, 2020, it's going to be incorrect for every subsequent estimate all the way up to April 1st, 2030. So it is very important for your boundaries to be correct. And also, I wrote myself a little note here. After we did the census in 2010, there was a challenge program called Count Question Resolution. Over 90% of those cases, the issue was the municipal boundary was incorrect. We have the housing unit in the right location, just the boundary was incorrect. So BAS, very, very important. I will talk about new construction next. You can see this is why the Egyptians stopped building pyramids. Government bureaucracy even back then, so. Okay, so our new construction program, it is non-Title 13. As Bob mentioned, the LUCA program, it's a Title 13 program. The reason it's a Title 13 program is that we're sending you address list for new construction. And for LUCA, you're also doing a review of that address list. For new construction, you're just submitting new addresses to us. I don't think it's included in here, but you'll be able to submit addresses from March 1st, 2018, all the way up to April 1st, 2020. And I always tell people, you know, well, this program is going to start in September, October 2019. How am I going to know if something's up and constructed and ready to go? I tell people if the site's cleared, if there are materials on the site, go ahead and count it. Let us sort out if it's there or not. Let's see. Oh yeah, and you can, for LUCA, you could submit either the geocode information or lat long coordinates. You can do the same for new construction. This last bullet here may be kind of confusing. We're only doing it in the self-response areas. That means we're only doing it in the areas where we can actually mail one of the postcards. If we're doing it in an area that's a P.O. box, rural route, maybe transitory locations, we're going to do field operations in those areas, so there won't be any need to do new construction there. So here are some dates, and I don't think we had these last time we were here. Starting in April, we're going to send email and mail invitations to highest elected officials. Just like LUCA, the mayor, county commissioner has to commit the government to the program, and they'll also have to assign a liaison. The deadline for registering, June 14th, 2019. We'll send out materials September 2019. Once you receive those materials, you'll have 45 days to submit all of your addresses in that 2-year period back to us. So we'll do training August, September timeframe. Again, like similar to PSAP, we'll do a webinar type training. Deadline for submitting addresses, November 2019, and we'll start closing the program out December 2019. All right, next thing we'll talk about is PSAP here. And again, how can you look at Australia now and not think about Scooby-Doo? So I just couldn't find anything funny about PSAP. It's just not a funny program. So here, PSAP here, it's an opportunity for you to delineate your own geographies. You go in, make changes to census tract, block groups, whatever you need to do. 2 phases here, the delineation phase. For those of you that are participating in PSAP and have received your materials, you have 120 days to do the review from receipt of those materials, and then there'll be a 90-day verification after we send information back to you. So new this year, and up to every subsequent census, we've always given you what we did the previous year, and you've worked from there. This year, we did a sort of a pre-PSAP plan, the census did. We're sending that out. You have the option, you could accept that and you're done. Or you could use that plan as a base, make some additional changes, corrections as needed, and you're done. Or if you want to, you can use that 2010 base, do all the changes you want to do. So a little different, tried to make it a little easier for you. And like Bob said, unfortunately have to use GUPS. And I didn't mention in new construction, you can either use GUPS or your own ArcGIS if you want to. It won't be, I know it's painful using GUPS for LUCA for some of you, security issues and whatnot. Won't be that difficult for new construction. It is a non-Title 13 program, so I don't think I mentioned that previously. So here are key dates for PSAP. We've actually accomplished many of these already. Hopefully, those of you that signed up for PSAP, you were able to attend one of the webinars. And we've sent out the materials, so you should have all the PSAP materials. Start going ahead and doing your work. Let's see, and then we'll go through the process, doing the verification process again. You see January 2020 here, and we'll release geographies December 2020. And this is our Census Bureau webpage. I think that's a little difficult to see out there, but there's a link for all the programs. There's not one for new construction yet, but that's one of the ones we're getting ready to put on there. It's going through the final phases of the Federal Register notice. We're still getting comments on new construction. Once that's complete, we'll make a new construction link on our census.gov webpage. And if you have any questions, that's our telephone number at the Atlanta office and our general email at the Atlanta office. And I'll leave that up for a minute if y'all want to write that down or take a picture. And then just some final thoughts from the mind of Stephen Wright. If it's a penny for your thoughts and you put in your 2 cents worth, then someone somewhere is making a penny. And it's not me, I guarantee you that. So we'll go back to the contact page. So that's all I have here. If we want to do question and answer now.
Any questions for any of us?
Okay, I'm not sure if this should be to the group or individually, but I'm the census liaison for Mecklenburg County, and I'm working with the census liaison from Charlotte in PSAP together. So I'm kind of wondering if they do their part and we do our part, how do we turn that in together, or should we be working together in the same office to be doing that?
Did you receive separate PSAP materials, or are you just working with Mecklenburg County?
We both downloaded the information.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there is a way where you can put your information back together. Let me call you when we get back.
That's what I thought, sorry.
let me call you when I get back. So yes.
Here's perfect. Yeah.
Oh.
I was just going to respond to her. We had a similar situation with New Hanover County and Wilmington back in the 2010 census when we participated in PSAP. And we worked with the county and had them submit. We contributed. I was with the city. But it was great to have that effort, and then the county submitted it for us.
Primarily, correct me if I'm wrong, but primarily PSAP is a county-based function because you're looking at the tracts, and primarily PSAP is based county level because you're looking at county subdivisions like census tracts and then further block groups and CDPs. There's room for local governments to have input at the municipal level, but primarily I think the participation is aimed at counties.
And I think one of the ways to do that in the county, for example, we invite 10, 15 different municipalities to the table, work together to see those census tracts that need to be modified, and then send that to, I guess now, to the Council of Governments. Is that correct? Or is direct to the U.S. Census Bureau? That's my question.
Well, for you, you're going to send yours to, after you're done, you'll send yours to Blair, and he'll submit it through the central line of COG. That's correct.
Now, I have another question about LUCA program.
Okay.
We revised the master address file, and we found a lot of issues with the addresses being in the wrong location.
Okay.
You probably already know these issues. We're trying to look at it, and it seems like the address canvassing operation that was back in 2009 was done in the wrong way. It seems like somebody just sitting in a vehicle, taking longitude and latitude with a device, was putting those points in the wrong location. How is going to be the Census Bureau is going to fix that this time, or?
Well, hopefully, during LUCA, you've made some changes to those incorrect track and block numbers. Hopefully, it's just block numbers. We are doing address canvassing a little different this time. We're doing it's in-house address canvassing. We're using folks. They're just basically looking at Google images to verify the correct locations of those housing units. There won't be a lot of. And I know what you're talking about because we look at the maps and you can see the structure points. They go in and out, and it looks like somebody's driving down the road and avoiding parked cars. So yes, I'm totally aware. So yes. So it's going to be we'll do address canvassing a little differently this time. It won't be people walking around the streets, walking up and down the street doing that. So no.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there a method of correcting street center lines for going to Census Bureau?
Probably your best bet to do that will be through this GSSI program, which we're sort of put on hold right now since we're just focusing on Decennial. But after the Decennial, we'll start up the GSSI again, and then you can submit your own, or counties can submit their own centerline file to us. We can put that in our system. So that's probably the best way to do it.
Speaking of traffic, traffic analysis zones, I understand, will not be delineated in the 2020 census. So how could the PSAP program be used for traffic planning, transportation planning?
Do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, the traffic analysis zone geography is not something that's delineated necessarily as part of the decennial census. It is a geography that's derived for the census transportation planning package data. That's a separate product. But it does cost money to have those TASs delineated. And because budgets are getting tight, the decision has been made to sunset the traffic analysis zone as its own geography. The closest analogous, to use a fancy word, the most similar geography to the traffic analysis zone in size is the block group. So block groups are defined during PSAP. So it's a little added importance for PSAP this time around because the block groups that you define, not only are you going to be getting data back for those through things like the American Community Survey every year for the next 10 years, but those block groups are also going to be the tools that go into the transportation planning packages for the next decade. So TASs won't be there. The block groups will be there. They're defined during PSAP.
So what geographies do local governments use, or the regional planning organizations use?
All three of them. Census tract, census block groups, and census blocks. Now, my question is for David. The census blocks on 2020, and I think everybody over here works with that kind of data. I know it's difficult to find some of that information. You find it, but for 2020, you're going to come with a newer version of the census block? Not the census block groups, just the census blocks.
That's probably a redistricting issue, yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the first real program that got kicked off was the Census Redistricting program. That's about 7 phases. The first main phase of that involved participation from the state was the block boundary suggestion process. So we had a version of GUPS that looked at, this is what we propose the structures of blocks will be for 2020. And I think there's a shapefile for that on the Census Redistricting site. The questions at the time were, if we don't make any changes to what we see here, is it safe to assume that these will be the blocks we'll have for 2020? And we were told that's a safe assumption. So really what the block boundary suggestion process was doing is showing the proposed blocks for 2020 and saying, does this make sense, or should we move this block boundary to the other side of the street because there's some houses to incorporate? That was the discussion around block boundary suggestion. I'm sorry. Who worked on it?
Who worked on the block changes?
Yeah, it was, for North Carolina, it was a state. There are two redistricting liaisons for the state. One is me, the other one is in the legislature. And we had the Census Redistricting staff came to do a presentation to the General Assembly. Unfortunately, that presentation to kick the program off happened about 2 days or right after the Supreme Court said we had unconstitutional districts. So everyone was wrapped up in redrawing districts at the time. So because we have a lot of districts that haven't been settled, the block process was kind of a little bit farther down on the to-do list. So we did take a look at it. We have verified the voting precincts, which is where we are now in the voting districts. The blocks really were, they were given a look, but it wasn't a real deep dive on that.
We've got a lot of our blocks that cut right through the open apartment.
Yeah.
You have blocks cutting through the middle of apartment buildings. Oh.
So half the apartment buildings, one census block and half is in the middle.
Is that apartment buildings split between census blocks? So I was going to ask, what's an example of applying this participant statistical area program, PSAP, applying that? What would be a typical submission of a proposed adjustment to a boundary? Anybody?
I think, I'll just use this. I think it's, for a lot of the preparation work that goes on, LUCA was a heavy lift for you folks in the local governments, and I recognize that, but I think a lot of y'all recognize that it was important to get this right because there were issues with addresses that are split between blocks and things like that. I think the big selling point for PSAP is this is how you tell the Census Bureau how you want to consume your own data. So looking down the road a little bit, if you're looking at some developments within your county, if there's some farmland that may be developed into a subdivision, if there's some areas of population that are contemplating incorporating as to cities into towns in the future, now is where you can say, we would like to have this area defined as a block group, or we'd like to have this community designated as a census designated place and evaluate the impact of that population going forward for the next 10 years. Now, PSAP is a voluntary program, but it is something that really makes the data more consumable in a more useful way for you. So I would encourage you to take the time to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck from this.
Yeah.
Are block boundaries drawn with political government boundaries in mind? And if the attempt is made to do that, how reactive are they to the kind of last minute or last year or two annexations that would interrupt what's already been drawn?
Political boundaries in terms of like annexations or?
Existing political boundaries, city boundaries, towns, and, representative districts, political and government. Do they try to match those that are already there?
Well, the census blocks are the smallest geographic entity that everything is built on the census block. So eventually the census blocks are going to have to reside within the same county. They'll have to reside within the same census tract. They have to reside within the same block group. They have to reside within the same voting precincts and districts because that's the constitutional requirement for the census is for this apportionment purpose. So initially when they come out, they are the smallest building blocks. It's kind of like a Lego. You can build whatever you want to, but you got to build it with those blocks, with those entities. So as they're originally drawn up, they're going to have to conform with the existing voting districts and everything that we have currently in place. That's what the redistricting process is doing. But after the data, so the process is, Census Day is April 1st, 2020. By law, the total populations for the state have to be on the president's desk by December 31st of 2020. Those numbers will define how congressional seats shift, who gets apportioned. The following April, the redistricting file will be released from the Census Bureau. That will have all the detailed information at the block level that we'll use to redraw those new districts. So at that time, the new entities will have to conform to the census blocks. But that's only, the census blocks will remain the same and the data won't be updated for the next 10 years. So as things change, we'll go through this whole process again in 2030. So, but as of April 1st, 2021, they're going to conform to the block boundaries.
So it's based on the population thresholds as well, right, with census block groups and with census tracts.
Right, that's
Right.
not per block, yeah.
Right, just for.
But that's an important thing to remember for PSAP is that you can't just draw them any old way you want to. And I'm sure the Census Bureau is going to let you know that they're kind of attached to census tracts. They'd like those to be historically kind of consistent. However, when they pass population thresholds or fall below population thresholds, they may need to be subdivided or merged. And when that happens, they want your information on how best to subdivide those areas or merge them to meet your needs. Again, this is voluntary, but this is how you get data back to best meet your working needs throughout the decade. So for census tracts, the ideal population is 4,000.
I think so, yes.
But they can be as large as 8,000.
That's correct.
For block groups, the ideal population is about 1,500, plus or minus.
This is for the first client?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, who's on?
The first one. I'm not going to talk about that.
Sure.
You were talking about the counties who that showed a decrease in
Right.
population. And you have a projection of 20 years. Do you see a further decrease in the population of those counties that are decreasing now?
Yeah.
And
So
then what do you foresee the future of those counties?
Yeah. So the issue, if we look at not just North Carolina, but the U.S. as a whole, you see an aging population, which has impacts on many, particularly rural counties that have folks aging in place because there's not people being born or moving in to replace that population. So you see that. So yes, we do expect, maybe not, I think in the 10-year projection, we had 17 counties losing population, but you probably see that if we looked at 20 years, I can't remember what the number was, but if we looked at 20 years, you probably see 17 or 20, something like that, of those, if current trends continue. If something, by some miracle, there's something that happened that brought more people in those areas, but current trends based on fertility, changes in fertility, and changes in net migration. So, yeah.
What would be the future of those counties as far as, do they just lay in waste?
Well, I mean, it's not that they're going to be zero population. So there's going to be a population there. And in some cases, it's just that I think North Carolina has had this benefit of many years of most counties growing in population. And if you look at even, I looked at peak population, looking at this decennial census and what was the peak population. Well, I can't remember what the number was, but maybe 86 counties, maybe 90 counties had peak population in 2010. So you don't have a lot of counties that, and I hate to bring Texas in, but where I grew up in West Texas, there's counties that the largest population they ever had was 1930. And so they've got this huge, great open. So the benefit, so one of the good things about North Carolina is you don't have that long history of population decline. But as we look towards the future, as we have an aging population, as all those different factors lead to areas that were probably, they're not going to, like I said, they're not going to fall off the face of the earth, but they're going to have to be faced with a slow growing population, an older population, so they're going to have these challenges of how do we maintain what we have, how do we change our services to meet the new population demographic.
And if I could just chime in real quickly here, what we've seen over time, we've had larger areas, and if you remember Mike's maps, there was one that showed that we had 33 counties that lost population. estimated. But then if we looked at the projection, that number shrunk down to 17. Part of that is the growth of some of the metro areas that are expanding into these counties that have been losing population, but now those are becoming bedroom communities. Also, they're starting to look at, part of what we're seeing nationally. You look at the states that are losing population. A lot of those are Rust Belt. The types of industry that supported that population are diminishing or relocating. So the reason that we're gaining a lot of in-migrant population is because there are types of industries that are starting here. So part of it is a planning question. What are some of these counties going to do? Are they looking at developing programs through community colleges that are going to support new industry? Looking at the nature of the metropolitan area growth around them. So some of the counties that we saw losing population 10 years ago are now growing at a faster rate than the counties around them because they've done that sort of planning. So just because you're losing population now doesn't mean you're going to be losing it forever. The challenge is, what sort of plans are you putting in place now to address future growth?
Yeah, and I'll chime in also that if you look at, so last decade there were 7 counties lost population. Right now there was 33 between 2010 and 2017. But if we looked at 3 years ago and the still trying to recover from that Great Recession, there were actually more counties that had lost. So if we look at, I showed that map of 10 years beyond, we're only having 17. So part of it is that recovery from this economic recession.
So I think I heard you say that the census tract, the smallest census tract, is about 4,000 population up to 8,000.
4,000 is the ideal population.
Ideal.
Yeah.
And that population is based off of households, correct?
That's
the household count.
Well, that's the population. There is a household number, an ideal household number, which I can't recall.
I'm not sure about that either.
I apologize for dragging my question out.
No, go ahead.
My group just took over the BAS update this year, so we're really learning by the seat of our pants right now. I work for the city of Durham, and most of our population growth, a large portion has been in Wake County, where we've gone over the county line over to the Briar Creek area. So those census tracts would be for Wake County census tracts.
That's right.
For the city of Durham portion over there.
That's right.
But it's still counted back towards the city of Durham.
Right. So there are, a census tract is a county subdivision, not a municipal subdivision. So, but you can certainly have municipalities that cross county lines. So a census tract is a county subdivision. Municipalities can certainly cross county lines. So you're going to get a census count for the city of Durham. You're going to get a census count for the county of Durham and the census tracts within Durham. Since part of Durham goes into Wake County, there are going to be Wake County tracts that would include some municipal Durham population.
Great. Thank you so much.
And both my children and their spouses have now moved into the Briar Creek area in Durham, so you're welcome. I expect my check in the mail. So.
Thanks. And when you get into, there's actually some sub-geographies, but like you could have a tract that's going to have, say, Durham and then maybe Raleigh or unincorporated areas. So the full tract has all those different geographies in it. But then there's, if you look at the block group, and then there's a partial block group geography that would actually be specific to the block group portion that's within Durham. So you could actually tease that out.
Yeah, and in terms of looking at the population makeup for your tracts, like I said, the ideal population is 4,000 persons. It can be higher, it can be lower. If it gets like 8,000 or more, they're going to want you to subdivide it. But that population is all population. So if you've got group quarters populations, like if you got dorms at Duke, that counts as part of the population. So they make no distinction about the type of population. If you have a prison, that's still population, and it needs to be included in how you're drawing your tracts and everything.
You mentioned that every 6 months you get postal data to supplement your address files. Is there any other data that you use to supplement?
You want to take it?
For what? I'm not.
For map your address.
GSS is one. What else?
Yeah, so it's the The deliverance sequence file is what's delivered by the U.S. Postal Service to the Census Bureau every 6 months.
Right.
So that's just as a process. The GSSI program is something that's fairly new within the last 10 years that the Census Bureau started. I think, I don't know, you correct me on this, is there a set schedule for that, or is it just as needed?
Well, we'll probably, like I was mentioning earlier, we'll probably start GSSI up again after the census. Right now it's sort of on hold. We don't have funds to do census and GSSI. We'll start GSSI up again 2022, 2023, something like that.
So that would be an update every 6 months from the Postal Service, as needed from the state partners for GSSI. And then when we get to census time, they do LUCA. I think those are the main updates and reviews from local governments. I think the vision, David mentioned the boundary annexation survey. There is a process by which there can be statewide partnerships. So eventually, if we organize well enough in the state, there could be a single response point for all of Bass. So the state would report for the municipalities and the counties. There's a possibility that could happen with addresses too. That's sort of what GSSI is, but there may be more opportunities going forward. I just haven't heard of any.
Thank you. Yes.
Will that postal service entry that you get, will that include between when we submit new construction at the end of the year till April 1st? Because in Wilmington, since we submitted LUCA in October, I've already issued 1,000 new addresses.
Right.
So I don't want those to get lost. But will they come through in the post office? Because we issue our addresses to the post office.
Possibly. I mean, I don't know for sure, but definitely the new construction, you would definitely want to put them on that new construction list. So yes.
Yeah, but there's a lot of new construction that I didn't know about in October when we submitted. So there could be a chance that there's a lot of the 1,000 addresses that I have now that I've added.
Right.
That I didn't include in census. So I don't want to miss between the end of this year and April 1st, unless we have a chance to resubmit new construction right before April 1st.
Well, I mean, you can go all the way back to March 1st, 2018 for addresses.
Right, but when we issued in October of last year, I didn't know that these 1,000 addresses were going to come through.
Right.
So there's a chance that there's 1,000 addresses after the end of this year and the beginning of 2020 that we wouldn't have a chance to submit because we didn't know that they were going to be added into Wilmington. That makes sense.
So is there, I think the concern is you're saying that for new construction, they begin with March
1st, 2018, all the way up to April 1st, 2020.
So she's thinking there might have been a gap between the previous October and that.
No, I'm wondering, so we submitted all new addresses up to September of 2018. So if we submit new construction addresses at the end of this year, what happens to new construction addresses that I don't know about at the end of this year, say that are in the beginning of 2020? How do those get submitted to the census between when we submit at the end of this year and April 1st?
I mean, those are ones you're basically, like I mentioned, those are the ones, if you've got information that they're going to be built, go ahead and include them on your list.
But a lot of times we don't have that information. Like the 1,000 that I've added since the end of last year, I didn't know that there was, so there's a chance that in those 4 months, the beginning of the beginning of 2019, that there's addresses we didn't have a clue were coming around because of the rapid growth in Wilmington. So there's a chance that there's a whole bunch of addresses we didn't even know could be there until, April 1st.
They'll probably fall in our non-response follow-up, to tell you the truth. That's what will end up happening to them. We'll probably end up sending people to those houses individually to collect information. That's what's going to happen.
There's a lot of new, for this census, the Census Bureau, in an effort to keep costs down, are using a lot of new technologies. And David mentioned the in-house address verification. That's one of them. So every address is going to be verified, but in the past that was done by people walking around the neighborhood verifying the addresses, and that's very expensive. So they're going to try to do that using aerial imagery, things like Google Maps and things like that. So if you do have address points that exist now, but maybe they haven't been submitted, there's still a chance. There's a lengthy process that the Bureau has outlined where if they look at an aerial image and they see more address points than they actually have addresses for, they will send people out physically to verify the addresses. So in areas of rapid growth, that's going to be more common. So I'm guessing that's what's going to be happening in Wilmington area. If you have any doubt, if you have an address that's been issued, but construction hasn't begun yet, depending on how your process is mapped out, go ahead and submit it to the Census Bureau and let them deal with it. And then for those items that come up that you don't know about, there's going to be some time, hopefully, to interact with these field address canvassers.
And there'll be, we had in 2010, we had a project that was I can't remember what it is. No questionnaire received, something like that. If somebody has a household, they never received a questionnaire, they can call one of the local census offices. Somebody will go out and enumerate them as well. Or their Count Me sites as well. We'll set those up in 2022. So.
I also think that if you can verify that every time now the Census Bureau is going to release the data for census tracts response rates every day instead of every week. So you can check that through the Census Bureau website, I think is coming.
No, that's true. That is true.
So then you can verify those hard to count areas as a census tract and do some kind of, I don't know, promoting things in those census tracts to increase the response rate. But my question for you will be, I think, is when that operation for verifying the addresses will finish with the Census Bureau? Is that a 2019?
The address canvassing operation,
Yes.
it'll finish in late summer 2019. That is correct.
Oh, thank you.
So yes.
I'm just curious, how confident are you in the numbers that you collect about the homeless?
I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, we'll go to all the locations where, their known homeless are to be, homeless shelters. I think we have a night in 2010, we called it transient night, where we had census folks go out to places where homeless people are known to gather, bridges, parks, et cetera, things like that. I mean, we do our best to count all of the homeless population. Of course, we're going to miss some. Some people don't want to be counted. We're just going to admit people inadvertently, so no fault of our own or theirs either. So,
And I should point out that is a big part of what we're going through with promotion right now, partnership and awareness. So the census people aren't just going to wander out on their own and try to find these areas. They're going to be working with local service providers, the people that run soup kitchens, homeless shelters, local HHS people that provide services toward those communities. So having those people involved with your census promotion now will better inform that process when it actually happens.
So that's why the complete count committee is such a good thing. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'm wondering for those like very small municipalities. Do they have any challenges to or like resource to help to validify the boundary or do the counting for your purpose for the census?
I'm not.
Well, there is the GUPS. So you're asking about, are there any tools to help smaller municipalities verify their boundaries with the counties? And I'm going to defer over to our folks with the Secretary of State's office, John Bridgers. So the process for boundary annexation survey is that happens every year, and there is GUPS software to help out with that. Some municipalities have agreements where they're partnering with their county, and the county verifies their boundaries for them. John's office is the certifying entity for BAS responses. So John, do you want to give a little bit of a background?
Well, when towns do annexations, they're by statute required to record at Register of Deeds office and with the Secretary of State's office. What has been submitted to the Secretary of State's office is on our website, and so we encourage towns to go and look at what we have to make sure that our records are correct, because if we don't have it, it can't be certified. If it's not certified by us, Census Bureau is not going to recognize it, so anybody in that uncertified annexation will not be counted as a resident of the town on the 2020 census. So as Bob was saying, we have a number of counties that are doing the consolidated county BAS, where they're submitting for the towns. That's a big help for these, particularly the smaller towns, to make sure that all the annexations are submitted to us, so they do get certified. and those people will be counted. Is that answering your question?
John, could you highlight a little bit, since you mentioned the consolidated BAS, is that just a handshake agreement? Is there a form? Is there a process for that?
There is a form. It's not a really formal form, but it's I've downloaded it from the Census Bureau website. I generally will fill it out for the county, because a lot of times if the county agrees to do that for the towns and the county goes to the towns and say, hey, can we do this? The towns think they're trying to take something from them, and that's not it. It's trying to make things easier. So I will willingly contact the towns and say, hey, the county's agreed to do this, would you be willing to let them do that? So, and it's a contact person, who in the town, who in the county, so forth. Well, it is a form, but it's a not very formal form.
And for my processes, I'm really not getting boundary per se. What I'm asking for, and I look at John's data and make sure we've got the annexations that's been reported to them. But on my survey, I'm really asking acreage. I'm asking for if you have any occupied housing on new annexations, or even a lot of times things are annexed, this year, but maybe 5 years from now they've added occupied housing, and so that goes into my population estimates. So I ask questions about older annexations, but in general, most of the smaller communities aren't annexing. I mean, I won't say that they're not completely, but most smaller communities are not annexing. It's usually communities that are in high growth areas, the apexes, the carries, and not to say that others aren't doing it, but you see a few communities that are annexing a lot every year, and then in other cases they may annex one in the whole year or every 2 years or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, folks, we're out of time for the formal panel presentation, but let's thank David Klein, Bob Coates, and Mike Klein for a very informative session.